All technology is rooted in ideology. One of the big misunderstandings of the internet is it suddenly came along, this miracle, this religious miracle that was granted to us because we were such good human beings. Or maybe we behaved ourselves one day, so we got it as a Christmas present. It's absolute nonsense. The internet has a cultural and a very concrete cultural ideological context. It represents the fusion of the old military-industrial complex of Southern California and the hippie ethic of Northern California. Both were, in a sense, opposed to authority. And in a book written by Fred Turner, a Stanford University professor, an excellent book entitled From Counterculture to Cyberspace, he explains that very strange union. Although on reflection, it's not that strange, because both the military-industrial complex, which invented the internet, or at least financed the internet in the late 50s, and the counterculture of the late 60s in San Francisco were libertarian, were hostile to authority, hostile to the state, hostile to traditions. So on reflection, I'm not sure how unnatural the union was, but these people were tied together by their libertarianism, by their hostility towards traditional forms of authority.
The web's democratic in one way and distinctly undemocratic in another way, and I think a lot of the confusion about the political ramifications have to do with that one word having so many meanings. So it's democratic in that it quite literally delivers power to the people. It essentially opens up participation in the public sphere, right? So I've been teaching at ITP, at the Interactive Telecommunications Program, for about 10 years. And the average age of my students has stayed pretty much the same. My average age has risen at the alarming rate of about 1 year per year. And so I'm in the position of teaching my own youth as ancient history, right? I have to get my students to understand what the media landscape used to be like. And I tell them all kinds of stories about what it was like. And they nod politely, and I think they believe me when I tell them these things, but I can tell they don't feel it. And the thing they really don't feel is when I say to them, in the 20th century, if you had something to say in public, you couldn't, period.
So regardless of whether you think, social technology and the internet is good or bad, it is. This is what, the genie is out of the bottle. And I think that's an amazing thing. The social web can do more good in the world than it can do bad. And it's the choice of people and the people who are using it as to what they want to do with it. It is the most empowering generational shift that has ever happened. And I think that is what makes it so compelling and so inspiring and so much fun. When you look at the fact that you can be sitting in your pajamas on your couch and help drive, world peace, that is actually happening today. That's possible in a way that it was never possible before. And I think that that's something that is incredibly important. So, does it mean that people have shorter attention spans? Yes. But is that a bad thing? Maybe, depending on what your point of view is. But in terms of what it can actually enable socially, economically, and politically, I think that we should embrace and welcome social technology, not fear it.
I think it's nearly impossible to pick on one aspect. I know that it's very helpful for people to have, this one thing is the reason why I was successful, but the only way I could characterize it is that it's just a tool. It's a tool that makes things that we do in our everyday lives so much more rich and easier and convenient and fun. And the essence of it for me is that there isn't a predetermined, way of behaving on the web. It's what you make of it, and that's true for a business, and that's true for an individual. And it's that tool and the power of that tool that you can use as an individual that I think is what makes it so kind of unquantifiable, I guess.
Now with the internet, people have access to create and distribute on their own. People can share their own thoughts and feelings, experiences, talents, which I think is a great thing. Well, we wouldn't exist if people weren't creating content. I mean, that's the bottom line. I always tell people we're the stage. They're the performers. But I don't look at us as a service as trying to exploit that. What we're trying to do is just provide the opportunities that didn't exist before, free opportunities for them to do so. Again, people always like to stereotype what YouTube's all about or what's popular. And of course, some of the natural kind of human element stuff is always going to rise to the top. Humor or other things that are outrageous or shocking. It's something that people want to pass around and share with one another. But you, from time to time, just have inspirational stories. You have political candidates leveraging the system. You have, people just capturing moments, be it a local event happening within their town, or protests, or what's happened in Iran. People capturing these moments and having now a chance to share them with the world, and people using it as a resource to be informed. And what I think it does, when you see the personal side of people just capturing everyday life, is that it breaks down cultural barriers. But again, I think this next generation is potentially more wary, or I guess conscious of that they are making their own decisions. They understand if they're reading a post or about to click on a link, where that's going to take them. So I think everyone's now is kind of conscious of how maybe people are trying to shape their thoughts or feelings. But again, that's not any different than what has happened in the past. I think.
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free, and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about in political terms. But it is a political issue. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign.
I think that people have patchy understanding of data on the web. It's such an enormously complex subject. Retailers might use data in a completely different way to search engines. I don't think anybody has ever had access to Google's search algorithms and what that means if you are suddenly at the top of the search when you look for something, or if you suddenly fall to the bottom. That's something that's very murky and behind the scenes. I think that people are only beginning to understand what it might mean to post things about yourself in a public forum that then might be looked at by people that you work with, or might be looked at by people that might employ you in the future. Or, that whole area, I think, is where people are now only beginning to have a think about what that might mean for them.
The moment you go online, you are recorded as having gone online. You leave a print. People know roughly where you're coming from, and they know you've entered a site. And once you've entered that site, it can say where you're going in that site, where you don't go in that site, what you look at, what you don't look at, what search terms that you use, what documents you decide to display, and how long you're there, and where you go next. And by putting all those things together, we can begin to develop characteristics of information-seeking behavior and use in cyberspace. It's very, very simple, and it's done automatically, which is the beauty.
Well, one way in which you'll give up personal information is obviously by clicking on one thing or another that reveals the sorts of things you're interested in. But how would they get from that to actually figuring out, for instance, who you are? Well, it's well known in the privacy world that things like your birth date, your gender, and your postal code or zip code will allow people to figure out who you actually are, what your true name is. Now, how might a website get that information from you? Well, let's say you want to sign up for a horoscope. Then you're going to give them your birth date and probably tell them whether or not you're a man or a woman. Then maybe you want to find out what your local weather is. Probably the easiest way to do that is to put in your postal code or zip code. And bingo, they've got 3 pieces of information that are going to make it really easy for them to figure out exactly who you are. It's hard to say just how valuable personal information on the web is. I think that most companies would rather have cash to start with, but the information is coming to them almost for free. That is, the your clickstream data just comes to the website, comes to advertisers without your actually having to do anything other than just going and clicking on things. So it's a very, very cheap and unobtrusive form of currency. I mean, probably the best thing about it is that it is so unobtrusive. You don't know you're giving it up, and so it seems entirely free to you. And then the consequences of it, maybe you get certain kinds of ads, maybe you get telephone solicitations, but you have no way of knowing that that's because you clicked on 17 things on these 5 websites, and so whatever it is that you're paying for it, you don't really make a connection to the information you're giving up.
People are, whether explicitly or implicitly, pretty aware of what the trade-off is, and I don't think that's explicit. I don't think that's necessarily just for Google. I think as we go online, the deal is relatively straightforward. So when you go on Amazon and you click, and as you click through from product to product to product, you start to see the recommendations appear, either based on your past history or more typically your session. As you start looking for cameras, you start to see people who looked at this also looked at that. People who bought this, people who clicked at this bought that. In the course of your clicking, the service becomes more useful to you. The implicit, and for many people the explicit trade-off is that in exchange for watching over your shoulder as you shop, we will help you shop better. So there's 2 ways to look at this. There's the pure monetary definition of free, and then there's the sort of the broader definition of free, of an exchange of value. The web is if you choose to make it so, the web is very much free from a monetary perspective. Once you paid for access, once you paid your way in the door, your internet service provider, whatever, you can pretty much get what you want at no additional cost. That's from a strictly monetary perspective in terms of just taking out your wallet and paying cash. But I think that looking at the world through the lens of pure monetary value is not the right way to do it anymore. I think we now realize that there are other forms of value that we sometimes actually value even more. There's time, there's attention, there's reputation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty amazing to see how the next generation, I guess, evolves, if you want to call it that, because of their access to technology, but ultimately their access to information.
So when I look at whether social technologies and the social web is a good thing or a bad thing, if it's horrible for society or wonderful for society, I think the reality is that it's here. It's not going away. And so it's up to people who use it to decide whether it is going to represent the best of human nature or the worst of human nature. And realistically, it's probably going to be a little bit of both. But what is possible today with social technologies is profound. Namely, you can be sitting at your house in your pajamas, and you can actually impact the lives of someone sitting in a country hundreds of thousands of miles away that is wrought with political strife. You can say, I'm here, I'm listening to you. No, I absolutely believe that the possibilities and the opportunities for people to live a rich, passionate life that allows them to express themselves in all the ways that they want to, regardless of where they live geographically. I don't think it gets any better than that.
What would I say to the people who are sitting in front of their computers, believing in revolution? I think I would say the same thing as those people in the 16th and 17th and 18th century who went to church and who believed in universal redemption or realization in heaven. I believe that they are subjects or victims of false consciousness, that they're wrong, that they're believing in something that doesn't really exist, and they're dupes or they're exploited, particularly those of them who stupidly give away their labor for free so that young men in Silicon Valley can become infinitely rich.